All right, well, this week, going back to my roots, and that would be Southern rock. I happen to hail from the city of Jacksonville, Florida. And in the 1970s, Jacksonville, Florida was the epicenter of the music scene. Not quite the way it is in the Deadpool movies. It's a bit of a comic scene there, but in the 1970s, Jacksonville was the place to be if you wanted to be in the music scene. And there were so many bands and so much talent floating around Jacksonville. It was amazing. There are bands that you know their names, but you may not know. They all came from Jacksonville. They all knew each other, and they played as they were coming up in the nightclubs and the bars up there during that time frame for many years. Now, you know Leonard Skinnard. You may not know they're from Jacksonville, but they certainly are from Jacksonville. And at the same time, they were rubbing elbows and pushing speakers around and equipment amongst other bands like Allman Brothers, 38 Special, Blackfoot, and Molly Hatchet. So all these bands were active and coming of age and developing their sound all at the same time from the same area. So there is a bit of similarity between their music. Like I said, you know Leonard Skinnard most, but Molly Hatchet was right in there. And Flirtin' with Disaster is an album that I've always, sort of had in my repertoire of albums. And it just sort of takes me back home every time I put them on, because that is the sound I grew up on. I had actually some family members who knew some of the folks in different bands, and I had a very large family, and so they would hang out with some of them. Now, they're not names that we would know. They're not famous folks, but there were so many bands at that time that it was just the thing to do. And eventually, you know someone who knows someone. And Leonard Skinnard was sort of a homegrown locals to us. And it wasn't unusual, for you to hear about the Leonard Skinnard in just common conversation up until, the plane crash, of course. But during my childhood, these guys were just local folks, and then suddenly they went big and went national, and it was kind of interesting. I have an uncle who had a bar for a while, and before 38 Special became national, they actually played in his club, and it was just part of the local scene. So it was quite interesting. I was much too young, of course, to be hanging out at that time. But I sort of grew up on those stories, and it was kind of a fun time to be from Jacksonville. So Molly Hatchet, they were sort of, I'll say, throughout the band's history, they seem to have members come and go. So they sort of had a big mix along the way. But the initial band, as I understand it, it was created by Dave Lubeck. He was the lead guitarist, and he did vocals sometimes, but he was the founding member with Skip Lake, and Skip was on drums. And so the first band consisted of those two, plus Chris Caruso on keyboards, Bobby Maddox was the lead singer, Steve Holland was the guitarist, and Donald Hall was also a guitarist, but would sort of come and go. Now, the album was released in September of 1979, and this was their second album. Name of the album, Flirtin' with Disaster. But on side one, we had Whiskey Man, followed by It's All Over Now, One Man's Pleasure, Jukin' City. I want to diverge here for a second. Jukin'. The word jukin' is something that I grew up on. My family used this term all the time. And the term meant to go out and have a good time, to go dancing and party and celebrate kind of thing. I think the term is a little bit different. I think it's sort of in rap circles now, but that was a term that I grew up on, and I was very familiar with hearing the term, let's go jukin'. That was something that we used quite often. And so it's kind of special for me to see it here in a song title. So going on after that, it's Boogie No More. On side two, Flirtin' with Disaster. Then followed by Good Rockin', Gunsmoke, Long Time, and Let the Good Times Roll. Now, the biggest release for the band was Flirtin' with Disaster, and it peaked at number 42 on the Billboard charts. And I believe that the album overall was in the top 100 for 10 weeks. Now, some interesting things about the album itself. And the band. So the band's name was kind of interesting of how it came about. Well, they had 6 members of the band, so each person got 3 names they could put on a piece of paper, and they put all those names into a hat. So you had 18 names in there. Well, the decision was they were going to pick the first name, and that was going to be the name of the band. Well, apparently they went all through 17 names, didn't like any of them, and they only had 1 name left. So they pulled it out and it said Molly Hatchet. And 5 of the band members had never heard the name. They thought they were going to get a new female member of the band or something. Well, the person that wrote it down, it was the name of some sort of person or mythical person they had heard of that was a killer. And the name was Hatchet Molly. But he twisted the name around and reversed it and made it Molly Hatchet. Well, the band decided to stick with it. The local community in Jacksonville even made bumper stickers. They jumped all over it and were supporting the band, so the band decided to stick with the name. And that's how they became known as Molly Hatchet. So the other thing that's very interesting about the band is their cover art. Somehow, and I couldn't find the connection, but they were able to connect with Frank Frazetta. Now, Frank Frazetta, if you are remotely involved in comic books along the way, he's sort of very well known in that scene. He's known as the godfather of fantasy art. Think about Conan the Barbarian here. This particular cover was called Dark Kingdom, and Frank created that. There was a comment here in a line I thought was quite kind of interesting, is that the visual art here of the album combined with the music made it a visual sonic harmony. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Molly Hatchet kicked off this sort of genre of this, I'll say Conan or barbaric sort of cover art. They started it and other bands picked it up after that. So it was sort of a theme that they kicked off for music artists, or at least for Southern rock anyway. So that's Molly Hatchet. If you are at all interested in hearing some Southern rock, you need to pick this up. Now, Southern rock it's a bit lively. It's not sad in any way. It's all about life in the South, pretty much. Fighting with your woman, going out juking, all of these are themes of Southern rock. And it has a bit of a familiar tempo to it and a style. If you've heard Allman Brothers, you've heard Leonard Skinnard, you've heard 38 Special, and it's because they all grew up together and they were guys who knew each other. And so I find that, to me, it takes me home a bit. And if you're at all interested in hearing that sound, pick up this album from Molly Hatchet and give it a listen. Well, I appreciate you guys tuning in. You don't want to miss the next one. Hit subscribe. As always, thank you guys for tuning in. We'll see you next time.